Welcome to Threads Cultural Conversation 2025. It's my pleasure and honor that I have this opportunity to talk today with Professor W.J.T. Mitchell from the University of Chicago. Professor Mitchell has written a lot about images, pictures, imagination, and since our theme this year is reimagining, we thought that he is the best person we can talk to about this theme. So, Professor Mitchell, thank you for accepting our invitation.
A pleasure.
And to begin with, I'm curious about how you became interested in the topic of images and imagination. So, can you tell the story?
It would have to go way back to early childhood, I think, because as early as I can remember, I was fascinated by the appearance of things, the way drawings could make something appear that you didn't expect, that a face could easily appear in the trunk of a tree, um, or the man in the moon could look back at you. So imagination and the perception of images has always been there. The one I distinctly remember, I was raised a Roman Catholic, and of course, images are everywhere in the Catholic Church. Uh, in contrast to Protestantism, where images are forbidden, there you have to use your imagination. No pictures or statues. But the first book I ever received was a little missal that had on the inside cover, it had a plastic statue of the Virgin Mary, and I used to stroke it with my finger and think, so that's the Virgin Mary. Um, and the veneration of images, the feeling that they look back at you, that there's something precious about them, but also maybe sometimes later, when I discovered comic books, I realized images can also be terrifying, uh, very dark, and fearsome.
Very interesting. So, speaking of imagination, we have this, let's say, capacity or power in us that we call imagination. But I don't think we have a very clear-cut definition of what this human imagination is.
Mhm.
So, is it distinct from our intellect? Is it part of it? How do you understand human imagination?
The simplest versions of it, I think there are many versions of imagination. It's not like there's one simple definition. Um, I think it's synonymous with creativity, for one thing, but also with more dangerous things like hallucination, imagining things that are not there. Uh, so to me, imagination is connected with reason quite directly when you think about um, foresight, the ability to foresee what is going to happen. If I do X, then Y will happen. It's the fundamental thing that makes human beings able to plan. I don't see how you could plan without imagination, without saying, I need a shelter. Well, what's the essential thing? Well, to keep the rain off, to keep the heat in, like a second skin around you, the building of a house required somebody to imagine what would be involved in doing that and all the intermediate steps that would have to be taken to get there.
And when we want to reimagine something, what should we do? Is it like we erase the first imagination and then reimagine? How do we do that?
Well, it very much depends on what the situation is that you find yourself in. Uh, Long before October 7th last year, Gaza was under siege for 20 years already.
Mhm.
It was surrounded by military. All its borders were controlled. Uh, the inhabitants often referred to it as an open air prison camp. So it needed to be reimagined as something other than a place of siege, like an open air fortress, but a fortress whose walls are all controlled by what's around it, not what's inside. They had very little control over food, water, electricity, or anything like that. So I've often visited Israel and Palestine, and whenever I go, the people I like to talk to are the artists on both sides, uh, because the artists are the people who are trying to reimagine. One of my favorites was when the Israelis built a wall, a separation wall, to divide the Palestinian territory from Israel proper. Uh, an artist named Banksy went there, and he painted uh, wonderful murals on the walls. Some of them, they were opening imaginary holes in the wall so that you could walk through the wall and there would be a beach with palm trees right in front of you. So it was like utopian imagining. It wasn't real, but it responded to a real desire. My personal feeling is everybody thinks we have to imagine a two-state solution where we separate them. I don't agree. I think they need to live together
Mhm.
uh, and live in conditions of peace, brotherhood, equality. And this is what, and the reason I believe in this is because I relate to the artists there. They, that's their imagination. So listen to the artists.
Do you feel that maybe the two people need to also change their imagination in terms of how they want to be seen as a nation? Maybe that's maybe
Yes.
not the only cause, but one of the causes of the problem that the people cannot really imagine itself living with some other people.
Right. It's a terrible situation in that the people in power on both sides, I mean Hamas inside of Gaza and the current Israeli government, they imagine their adversaries as not even human. Uh, they want both sides want total annihilation of the enemy. So they're very similar in that way. Netanyahu on the one hand and Siwan, the leader of Hamas, they both want absolute victory. They want to destroy each other, and they both said this. It's their whole doctrine. So for them, they can't imagine anything except total annihilation of the enemy. Um, so in that sense, they're similar. The difference is one side has the power to maybe not kill off the idea. They can't kill off the imagination of a free, independent Palestine. So yeah, you can see that imagination can be very deadly. The idea that I imagine total victory and the disappearance of my enemy from the world. It's a kind of inhuman imagination. That's why human beings are really capable of doing terrible things uh, that first come out of the head as, this is what we want.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, moving to another topic that people talk a lot about these days, AI.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, how do you see the AI's influence on human imagination? Do you feel it's going to have a positive influence, broadening our imagination, or is it going to even limit it more?
In the 19th century, Thomas Carlyle said, everything bad about the modern world, and especially the French Revolution, was caused by the invention of the printing press. If it hadn't been for everybody reading about these new ideas, they would have never risen up against monarchy and tried to institute a democratic form of government. They just couldn't imagine it. Uh, it was a feudal society where authority was born with you. If you were rich and noble, that was it. You didn't need to do anything except enjoy your privileges. Um, So what is AI going to do? Well, I think AI has a revolutionary impact, but in some ways it's even more powerful because it doesn't just imitate our thought, but it is generative. Generative AI means new thoughts. We can make uh, robots now that look very human, that look back at you, that smile, that frown, maybe even can laugh. Now, a big question comes up. A lot of my colleagues say the same thing, but they can't really think. They can't really feel anything. It's all a simulation. And to that, I answer, when you go to a play and you see um, an actor weeping on the stage or bursting out laughing or any kind of other expression, do you raise the question, does he really feel that or is he pretending to feel it? So we totally accept uh, that other human beings can portray emotions they don't feel. Uh, it's so we've constructed a machine that can do that too. The machine, as far as we know, it doesn't feel anything. It mimics behavior. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's what an image is also. And imagination is about imitation. Imitation is a way of making an image that simulates something else.
Now, moving to another topic that you are currently working on,
Mm.
reimagining mental disorders.
Yeah.
And you have already written a book, this one, Mental
Yeah.
Traveler. I know that you have a motivational story
Mm.
behind the project. Would you
Yeah.
like to tell us the story and what you're working on right now?
Yeah. Well, that book you just held up is a memoir about my son, Gabriel, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was about 19 years old. And he spent 20 years struggling with it, trying to overcome the negative symptoms of it. A lot of confusion, emotional upset, depression, and then uh, very disturbing symptoms, including what you might call an excess of imagination. In some ways, that's what schizophrenia really is. It's when imagination goes wild. You can't control your thoughts. And then you begin to hear voices inside your head, or you see visions, hallucination, audio-visual hallucination is part of it. So that's all pretty well established. That's what, if you look at the medical literature on schizophrenia, um, it will include all those symptoms. But Gabriel was also a very intelligent uh, uh, young man, and he wanted to be an artist, particularly wanted to be a filmmaker, and he wanted to, as he said, I want to transform schizophrenia from just being an illness into an educational experience, something that could teach us about uh, not just what it is to have schizophrenia, but also what it is to be a human being in the first place. Because his feeling was, he said, doesn't everybody hear voices? Doesn't everybody see visions? Maybe they're more controlled with people who are healthy, uh, but they're often not controlled. Thoughts come into your mind, uh, uh, fear, paranoia. Paranoia is one of the big symptoms of schizophrenia, and it is a disorder of the imagination. You imagine danger everywhere. Uh, you walk into a room and you think everybody here is looking at me, uh, and they don't like me. Uh, so uh, it's normal human consciousness, but it's as if the volume is turned up on the inner voice and the intensity of the visions. is increased. So he wanted to normalize schizophrenia uh, and to uh, make a film about it. He did make a film entitled Crazy Talk, which uh, makes another step besides he tries to put you inside the experience of hallucination and schizophrenia, which is, and he said, isn't that what cinema is for in the first place? It's like a hallucinatory experience where you are wide awake uh, and you can walk out if you want. When you're caught up in a schizophrenic hallucination, it's not so easy to walk out or turn it off. So he wanted to treat cinema uh, as a way of understanding schizophrenia from inside and outside. And then he made one further step, which was crucial. He said, I don't think it's just individuals who go crazy. I think groups also go crazy, that in a mob, a mass of people, they suddenly a shared feeling of panic or anxiety or enthusiasm passes through the crowd. So everybody feels the same and they become exuberant, or the opposite, the panic of fear. And then social movements, most notably the idea of a cult, where you have a cult leader who spouts nonsense and makes his words as if they are the voice of God. And people then uh, identify with that. They accept this kind of imaginary authority. So he was very interested in what you might call political madness or social madness. Man is not the rational animal. Rationality is exceptional. You have to work hard at being rational. But human normality is emotional, sometimes delusional, always filled with fantasy, with complex, conflicting sorts of mental impulses. So, in short, we are the mad animal. We're the crazy animal, and that's why we need democracy if we're going to be able to govern ourselves.
And there was one particular passage from your book, Mental Traveler, that I really enjoyed, where you were talking about people saying something is unimaginable. And you said, no, it seems that it's all too imaginable. And I'm wondering if there is anything that is unimaginable to us. For example, a couple of days ago, we saw people being burned alive in refugee camps. Do you feel that us as human species have exceeded the realm of imaginable, or is there anything left for us to say it's unimaginable?
Mm. It's a profound question. I'm afraid that nothing, no matter how terrible, is unimaginable. And because, I'm an old man, I grew up in the period when the atomic bomb was first, at least I was, just a little kid. I think I was 3 years old when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed. Unimaginable. An entire city of 250,000 people vanishes in a few seconds. Everybody burned alive, and the survivors wounded forever. That was unimaginable. So when people say, "Oh, that's unimaginable," I say, that's no comfort. Just wait and see what can be done. I mean, right now there's a institute at the University of Chicago, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. They have a thing called the Doomsday Clock, which shows how close we are to a nuclear war that would basically ends human civilization. All the major cities of the world basically annihilated the way Hiroshima was. Uh, well, the hands of the clock are set very close to midnight. And they say in fact, it's never been closer because uh, the impulses to solve problems with war, to think that, oh, the best thing we can imagine is get rid of all those people. To come back to AI, we need all of the intelligent help we can get. Think about reasonable ways to deal with the precarious situation of our species. And so maybe AI has arrived just at the moment when we really need them. That's my hope.
Yeah, it's my hope as well. And on that note, thank you very much, Professor Mitchell, for your thoughtful sentences and your talks. And we're very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. I was glad to talk to you. Very good questions.